Malcolm, let me begin with you on this arrest that we're now learning about of a lieutenant in the Coast Guard who was planning what the prosecutors are calling a mass murder attack unlike anything we've ever seen. Some very specific targets included in this mass murder that he was planning.
You know, I read the report and I took a look at what he was saying. Very interesting factor here is that he seemed to be an admirer of Anders Behring Breivik, the Norwegian neo-fascist, anti-globalist, supporter of Russia, who believed that there needed to be a global international of white nationalists who would go around conducting mass murder. Breivik himself carried out a mass murder and a car bomb attack in Norway in which he killed over 89 people, including an attack on Utoya Island, a political party children's summer camp where he shot 69 children to death. So he said he could eliminate the next generation of liberals leadership from Norway. This appears to have been a person who wanted to copycat that attack. He said he followed Breivik's manifesto saying about taking steroids to pump yourself up for the attack. What I find most noteworthy is his arsenal. He had a lot of guns, but he didn't have a lot of ammunition. So there's most likely somewhere else caches of ammunition and weapons which he intended to carry out these attacks with.
Andrew McCabe appeared at 8 p.m. tonight on Chris Hayes' show. Chris Hayes is actually one of the people who was on this hit list of this Coast Guard lieutenant who's been arrested, is now in custody. Chris Hayes asked Andrew McCabe how the FBI considers these kinds of threats from white supremacists like this suspect who's now in custody. Let's listen to what Andrew McCabe said about that.
The FBI takes the threat posed by domestic terrorism in all its forms very seriously. Does it take it seriously enough? That's a different question. As this threat continues and develops and becomes more violent and more intense, the FBI, I'm sure, is going through a process of constantly reevaluating how their intelligence collection and their investigative resources are positioned against this threat. But I can tell you from my own experience, it is one of the most concerning and closely watched threats that we have in the counterterrorism division at the FBI.
And Malcolm, in this case, closely watched enough that they were able to catch this one and stop it.
Well, you know, there's this saying with the FBI that if you're plotting an attack and you're trying to communicate with ISIS or Al-Qaeda, you're talking to the FBI. They have gotten down international counterterrorism to a science here in the United States. It is the right-wing extremists, and we're seeing the largest level of right-wing extremism since the 1980s militias movement. And the problem is, many people in this movement believe that law enforcement and organizations like the FBI are going to be sympathetic to them. It's just a question of manpower and resources and the belief that this ideological underpinning of white supremacy is a threat on par and equal to what they believe is Islamic extremist terrorism. Until the Bureau gets its orders, and it's certainly not getting any help from this White House, they are going to be stressed and stretched to be able to meet this threat. And one other thing, this is one individual. It is very hard to get in the mind of a single killer. But as soon as you get these indications, the organizations like the Coast Guard Intelligence and the FBI snap down on that person.
Bret, you did the analysis for Politico about what's happening already in the 2020 campaign from foreign actors like Russia and North Korea. This suspect who's in custody, who was planning mass murder, was trafficking in some of these Russian-sourced materials online. What you have found in the reporting of Politico, apparently, is that you're seeing patterns that are virtually identical to what we saw in 2016.
Correct. And I don't know the particulars of this case, but I think this and the recent statements by Dan Coates and others highlights that this isn't just about fake news. It's not just about politics. It's about a full-scale attack to divide and confuse Americans and rip at the fabric of our society. And so for us, we look at this research from a nonpartisan perspective because we see weaponization of ideas on all sides. And that, in that particular case, to me, it's an example that narratives have consequences and memes can turn into behaviors. And what happens on Twitter and social media doesn't stay there. So we saw a troubling shift in tactics and narratives in the middle of the 2018 cycle. We analyzed over 140 million tweets and saw that there was a shift in tactics that evaded detection by how most researchers find this stuff. They were getting more clever, more nuanced. And then all these accounts started surging last minute, really the last week of the 2018 campaign. And they were pushing narratives around voter fraud, around the caravan crisis. And these narratives started to have more and more calls to violence if there were cases of voter fraud or other conspiracies that came true.
And what do you think that the correct measures are being taken to defend against this kind of stuff for the 2020 campaign?
Unfortunately not. I think that's one of the items is both from the government, these political campaigns, journalists, and NGOs really just aren't equipped. We're still debating what happened in 2016. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, bad actors, both domestic and abroad, are evolving their techniques, going to new platforms, and being more targeted in the way they really try and hack the thoughts of everyday Americans.
We're out of time for this tonight, but we're going to have you both back to guide the audience about what they should be consuming and how they should be consuming political information online during the campaign. Bret, Havroth, Malcolm, Nance, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.